Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
The National Institutes of Health has been smiling on the University of Rhode Island. URI's vaccine research program in Providence just won 2 big awards from the NIH that will bring in more than $20 million. The goal is to beef up the size and scope of biomedical science at URI. The school's work on dengue fever and other diseases is also likely to play a key role in the transformation of the Jewelry District's empty South Street Power Station into a hub for education. This week on Executive Suite, University of Rhode Island professor Dr. Rothman. Plus, startups come in all shapes and sizes, and even on stages. The 3-year-old Wilbury Theater Group is the new kid on the theatrical block in Providence, performing out of the Southside Cultural Center, where Trinity Rep got its start. Wilbury's latest production, Detroit, looks at the personal toll of the Great Recession. On the second half of Executive Suite, founding artistic director of the Wilbury Theater Group, Josh Short. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. As you heard there, later on in the show, we're going to talk to Josh Short about his new theatrical company, somewhat new still, the Wilbury Theater Group. But first, glad to be joined by Dr. Rothman, who's just, it's raining money on you there at URI.
Oh, I wouldn't go quite that far.
I didn't think so as an understated academic, but pretty impressive. Those are some large numbers, and we're going to talk about that. But I want to actually start by asking you about the news of the day. There's all this turmoil in Washington around funding. And, you know, the NIH actually comes up a lot, the National Institutes of Health, the impact on funding for that agency. The federal government is shut down. We're talking about NIH grants. Does that have any impact so far on your lab?
It hasn't had any direct impact on our lab. So when NIH awards a grant to an institution, then they give them the authority to spend the money, and URI, for the moment, is allowing us to spend money, and they will eventually go to the federal government and ask for that money back. And I think if the money doesn't come back at some point, the university's not going to really be enthusiastic about my spending too much of it.
Sure, so it's not, so it wasn't on October 1st they locked the door or anything because it's NIH funded?
No, we're operating and our work is continuing. All the people that are employed are still employed. I think the other area that affects me in particular, because my research involves a lot of international collaborations, I have a lot of collaborators in the US Army, for example. So there are people who are part of our project, either directly or indirectly, who are either Department of Defense employees directly or contractors or civilian employees. So the civilian employees of the Department of Defense have been furloughed, or at least some of them have. The contractors, I understand, have not yet, and the active duty personnel have not. So if this continues, it will definitely affect our research. Next month, there's a international meeting known as the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, one of the most important scientific meetings for our line of research on dengue. And we are concerned that some of the people from the military may not be authorized to travel to the meeting. It's the one time of the year when our group gets together to review progress and discuss plans. So it could have a significant impact.
And the other federal issue that I hear about the NIH a lot is the sequester, those automatic spending cuts in terms, and the NIH is one of the agencies affected by that. Again, have you seen any impact on that so far with the caps, or is there any discussion about it in the research community, the people you talk to?
For people funded by NIH, the currency that we spend a lot of time talking about is the success rate of NIH grants. And that is at historic low levels right now. You would find for the typical opportunity to apply for funding that less than 10% of applications will be funded. For some initiatives, it's even below that, 5% or less. And that is in part due to the sequester. It's due to the overall trajectory of the federal budget.
And I assume it takes some time to put one of those applications together. It's not a quick...
No. If you want it to be successful, you better invest the effort into making it really a top-notch application.
All right, so let's talk about the things that are working out of the NIH and there at URI. But first, I want to talk about your own career trajectory. You joined URI in 2011 from the University of Massachusetts Medical School. I'm curious, what made you decide to move to URI to bring your research here?
I joke at times with my wife that perhaps it's my midlife crisis, if you will, but I did my training at UMass in Worcester. That's subspecialty training in infectious disease, and that's when I got involved in biomedical research, specifically on dengue virus infections. And I was at UMass as a faculty member for almost 25 years. And it came time to think about what kind of impact I could have in the area. And I had been in touch with Dr. de Groot, who had founded the Institute of Immunology and Informatics.
At URI.
At URI. And it was an exciting opportunity to try to make a bigger impact for me individually. And so that was an opportunity that just at the time was too good to pass up.
And could you tell me a little bit more about that institute? You mentioned Dr. Annie de Groot of Epivax, and she's also the director of the Institute for Immunology and Informatics. I mean, talk about a fancy name that's going to intimidate a layman, but it's been around since 2008. What's going on there? What drew you to it? What was interesting about this institute?
So Dr. de Groot's research is in the area of informatics and immunomics, and what they're trying to do is to use computational methods to look at the genetic sequences of different pathogens and to design vaccines in a much faster way than would be done traditionally. As you may know, most of the vaccines we have were developed through a trial and error process, or several things were tried based on some natural observations. Measles vaccine, for example, was taking advantage of what we knew about measles already. So there have been diseases where it has been very difficult to develop vaccines. And the hope of the Institute when it was founded was that by using the genetic information that's become available in recent years and the computational power, that you could identify the best parts of pathogens to incorporate into a vaccine. That has its own connection in basic immunology research. And I would say my own area of research has been in basic and translational immunology, where we're trying to understand disease processes with the idea that if you want to make a vaccine or any other treatment, you have to understand your enemy a little better than you do already. So,
and we're getting up toward a break, but I want to ask you, actually, before we get to what you're going to do with this money from the NIH, sort of the nuts and bolts of it. When we get these press releases as reporters from Brown, from URI, from elsewhere, saying, one of our researchers has won $10 million from the NIH, and you sort of imagine like the Publishers Clearinghouse. They show up with a $10 million check and they hand it to you, but that's not really how it works. What's the actual, take the $10 million, the second grant you won, how will that work? Are they parceling it out over time? Does it have a set period? Are there big parameters in how you use it?
You picked the more complicated one to ask me about,
let's
actually.
do the other one then.
But both of them are similar in some respects. These are multi-year grants, so both of them are extended over 5 years. And because the federal government is only funded on a year-by-year basis, it's really the promise of funding in the future, and at any time NIH could tell me that, well, we're not going to fund you next year. So it's
despite the promise of 10 right now.
They can do whatever they wish, I suppose, yes. It's unusual for NIH to do that for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it would be hard to plan.
Yes, and that's a big part of the challenge for academicians, is planning things in continuity, keeping staff funded and trained, and not losing that facility. But both of these are 5-year grants, and they're approximately equal size over the 5 years. So we have particular research projects that we propose doing as part of those grants, and those extend over a 5-year period of time.
All right, we're going to talk about that research specifically when we come back, but first we're going to take a break. Stick with us to learn about dengue fever. It's not something you want to catch. Luckily, I don't think you will in Rhode Island, and we're going to hear about why, and later on we'll hear about the Wilbury Theater Group. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and when we come back from this segment, we're going to talk to Josh Short, founder of the Wilbury Theater Group in Providence. But right now, I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Alan Rothman of the University of Rhode Island, and we're talking about some big-time National Institutes of Health grants he's won just in the last 2 months. Pretty impressive streak you had there, like an athlete or a ball player or something like that.
Thank you, but it's a streak. And
in the end, huh?
Past performance does not guarantee
as long as
future.
You're not juicing, right? So let's start with the August grant. This was $11.4 million for the research. You've alluded to it. I mentioned it at the top, into dengue fever, and this is your specialty. So tell us, for the layman who's never heard of it, it sounds awful. What is dengue fever, and what do you do about it?
Okay. It can be awful, but for most people it's not awful. So you have to think of it as a viral disease, first of all, and it's a mosquito-borne virus disease. Its cousin would be West Nile virus, for example. They're in the same family of viruses, although the diseases are quite different in many ways. So the mosquito that transmits dengue is different than the mosquito that transmits West Nile, and the only place you find that mosquito currently is in tropical parts of the world. So
like
Thailand is one major area, the Philippines, Central and South America,
Gotcha.
the Caribbean. People that have their vacation in the Caribbean often come back with dengue. That's a common problem. So, but I will say that this mosquito had, in past times, been found as far north as Philadelphia. And there was a very famous outbreak of dengue in Philadelphia back in the late 1700s. So, could happen again. Right now, dengue is a problem in Florida, for example. There's always been this particular mosquito, which is known as Aedes aegypti, in the Gulf Coast of the United States. And there has been transmission of dengue virus in Florida in the last several years. So big news for us, although it probably didn't make the news in Rhode Island.
It might not have made it here. So tell me about what you're going to do with this big grant, $11.4 million related to dengue.
So the first thing you need to know about dengue is it's very common. So there are probably hundreds of millions of people who get infected every year with dengue. Most of those people don't get sick or get mildly sick only, but still hundreds of thousands of people are hospitalized each year across the world. So this is a real important medical problem for people in that part of the world, and as an infectious disease physician, you want to make an impact on things, and so that's a reason for treating it. The second issue about dengue is that there's a really interesting immunologic phenomenon that contributes to the impact that dengue has. So most diseases that you get, the first time you get it, you might get moderately ill. The next time you get exposed, it's not quite as bad, and your immune system gets better over time. Dengue is one of these weird diseases where you can get it more than once. The reason for that is there are actually 4 different viruses that all go by the name of dengue. They get numbered, dengue 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's really the second time you get dengue that seems to be the worst. So the first time you get dengue, you would only be mildly ill, but the second time you get dengue, your risk of having a severe complication is very high. And the kinds of disease people get is a shock syndrome. So very suddenly in the process of the illness, people will have abnormal blood vessels, and the fluid in your blood will actually leak out of the blood vessels. And if this happens very rapidly, and if people are not in a medical center, they can go into shock, and people do die. Fortunately, physicians that have a lot of experience treating people with dengue do very well by doing simple things like giving them intravenous fluid. So overall, the impact of dengue on mortality worldwide is thankfully low. About 20, 30,000 people die each year that we know of dengue. So it's a major impact, and it's got this interesting immunologic phenomenon. That phenomenon has been a problem for vaccine development in the past because a vaccine is supposed to trigger your immune response, and here you have a disease where the immune response might go awry. So we need to understand the disease better. So I will say this grant is actually in its 5th cycle of funding. So we've had this project ongoing in Thailand and with people across the world for 20 plus years already. In the next phase, we want to extend that research to continue to understand the disease better. And this particular grant, the reason for the size of the grant is it's actually got 3 separate components to it.
We're going to have to wait to hear more about that because I don't want to run out of time on the second grant, which is $10 million. And this is interesting. It's an institutional development award, partly given to Rhode Island because Rhode Island's had a historically lower level of NIH funding than some states. What's the $10 million for?
So that is specifically to increase the institutional capability to do research. One of the key parts of these grants is that you have a common scientific theme that you're working on. So our theme is using the immune system to understand disease and apply it to develop new therapies. So we've collaborated with a group known as the Center for International Health Research, CIR, at Lifespan, and we're working together on similar themes. We have interest in global health, we have an interest in neglected tropical diseases, and an interest in translational immunology towards vaccine development and development of immunotherapeutics. So the purpose of the grant is to build our capability by increasing the infrastructure, getting more space to do research, getting more high-tech equipment to do research, as well as to take junior investigators and provide them with the seed funding to get their own projects up and running so they can be competitive when applying for grants at the national level.
And finally, we have only about a minute left, but people are going to be curious about the economic development side of this. And I know URI has pointed to your work and the work of the Institute as part of why they're looking at this big redevelopment of the South Street Power Station, also called the Dynamo House. I mean, what do you think could make a difference in Providence in terms of URI looking at investments and the type of work you do?
We're definitely limited by being in the Shepherd Building downtown. I mean, I have a very nice laboratory space there, and we're able to do the research that we're currently doing, but it's going to be limiting, and there will be problems in expanding further. Even applying for more grants gets to be difficult if you don't have the infrastructure to support it. So our real interest is in having a larger size of biomedical research where we can bring people together, coordinate effort, build that critical mass to get research going and have an opportunity to expand.
All right, well, we're going to be keeping up with Dr. Rothman and what you do there at the Institute. Thank you for being here. And when we come back on Executive Suite, we're going to talk to Josh Short, the founding artistic director of the Wilbury Group. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and now I'm pleased to be joined by Josh Short. He's the founding artistic director of the Wilbury Group, and its current production is Detroit, which I believe has just been extended.
That's right.
Another weekend?
Yep.
When can people go?
We have Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this weekend and next weekend.
And next weekend, people can come on down. Get tickets online, I think?
Yep, tickets online at www.thewilburygroup.org.
All right. So, Josh, there might be people watching who actually haven't heard of the Wilbury Group before today, because you guys, as I said, are kind of new on the block. How long have you been around, and what are you doing?
Well, we've been around for about 3 years now. We started up in 2010 working out of the old Perishable Theater, which is now 95 Empire. And what we've been focusing on is relevant, new, thought-provoking works. Every once in a while we'll do like a reimagined classical piece, but it's mostly new works that we're doing, yeah.
And tell me about your background. You're a native Rhode Islander, I believe.
Yep, I was born in Smithfield, actually, moved down to Matunic, where I was raised my whole life. Ended up going to graduating from URI, 2008, actually, yeah.
So decided to keep your artistic life here in Rhode Island.
Yeah, well, I think Providence is a great city for artists. You know, it's not so big that you get lost in the shuffle, and you can really do what you want to be doing up there.
And that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You know, Providence has some well-known theater groups, Trinity Rep and the GAM, and I know you've had support from them, and the actors cross over between the different groups. Why did you see an opening for a new one, and sort of where do you fit into the landscape here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, we didn't start to build a theater company. You know, it was just about putting on a play, putting on productions, keeping ourselves busy. And you know, after a couple of years and interest kept growing and growing, I mean, it was like, well, we really have to get a handle on this thing. As far as, I mean, Trinity Rep and the GAM have been incredibly supportive of what we're doing and what we're trying to do.
Not trying to block out the new guy or anything?
No, they've been really great, actually. I mean, a lot of what we do wouldn't be possible without the kind of support that those guys give us. So that's been great. I mean, as far as audiences are concerned, from their point of view, I think what we're doing, trying to cultivate new works and trying to do it at an affordable, accessible level, you know, a very inclusive level, I think that's what they'll see the difference at. Yeah.
And let's talk about Detroit specifically. It was going to finish the run this weekend. Now you have this weekend and next weekend, so people can go out and see it. You're seeing some pictures there from the cast. I saw it, my girlfriend. It really makes you think, especially as someone who covers the economy. But without giving too much away, can you tell people a little about this play? Got a lot of attention in New York and Chicago. What appealed to you about it as well?
Well, I think the first time I read it, I mean, it really just humanizes this economic crisis that we're always talking about, and you know, it's easy to think about it on a very on a high level, but you know, how is this affecting us at home? How is it affecting how we think about ourselves and each other and that sort of thing? So what this play really does is, you know, this one man has lost his job and they're trying to get by, you know, this couple together, and this other couple moves in that's also, you know, in dire straits, and how, you know, these two desperate couples kind of blow up. I don't want to give away the ending, but it's, I think humanizing the economic thing, really bringing it home for us.
And how's the response been?
It's been great, actually. It's been really great. We've had great audiences. People really seem to connect to this piece, which is always nice. Yeah.
Now I'm curious about, you mentioned when you started out it was more just to do shows, just to keep yourselves busy, and now you're doing pretty regular. You have a very nice website, you're doing a regular series, Detroit. This is the New England premiere, I think,
That's
of the
right,
play.
Yeah.
So how about the business of running a theater as the artistic director? I mean, how challenging is it in this environment, especially with a weak economy here in Rhode Island, to get a new nonprofit artistic group up and running?
It's pretty challenging, to be honest. It's, you know, you end up spending maybe like 80% of your time running a theater and not actually doing theater. You know what I mean? It's more grant writing or fundraising, that sort of thing. But the support has been great from the community, both from like the arts community and from, you know, audiences that come from all over. I think there's always room for new arts ventures, it feels like. You know, as long as you're putting out a product there that is genuine and well made, I think people are interested to see it.
When you think of a place like the GAM that started out pretty small, it now has a very nice theater there in Pawtucket, and seems like a pretty sustainable organization. I mean, what allows a theater to get to that point where they can stick around? And do you have that sort of vision for the Wilbury Group, that it could have that kind of lasting stick around and be have a sustainable base?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. The GAM has done an incredible job of really cultivating their audience from the warehouse that they started in Olneyville to, the institution that they've become today. I think, it's hard work. It's about paying attention to the work that you're doing. The GAM puts incredible work on stage every time, every production, and it's that consistency. People can really just know what they're getting when they go there, and I think audiences recognize that and appreciate that. And it really makes it an essential part of the arts community, which is what we're trying to become.
And then I'm curious about, I assume you have, at least once in a while, you interact with state and local government and things like that in terms of putting on shows and as an organization applying. I mean, are there things you see that could be done that could make it a more hospitable environment for groups like yours, or low-hanging fruit? How difficult has it been to get the support you need from sort of the official Rhode Island establishment and stuff?
Yeah, I wish I had some complaints or some criticism, but the mayor's, the Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism has been incredibly supportive. They're always willing to meet with us and help us out. I mean, they're in the business of making sure arts organizations succeed, and they've been great at doing that.
And you're down there in the South Side Cultural Center. People might remember that was the original home of Trinity Rep, right?
That's right, yeah.
And is it still a church? How does that place work?
Well, so
it's on Broad Street in Providence.
Right, it's on Broad Street. The church is actually adjacent to the space. The space itself is this huge old theater. I guess it could fit about 200 to 300 people in there, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful in that 60-year-old way that it's a little bit run down, but it's an incredible space. When you walk in there and you just think about all the great work that was done there, Adrian Hall and the early Trinity Rep crew, it's really humbling.
Yeah. We talked a bit. We only have about 30 seconds left, but how hard is it to get an audience for a new play? It's one thing if you're putting on Annie, you can probably convince people to go. But if you're putting on a new play, how difficult is it to get the word out?
It's a little more difficult. I mean, you try and tell people about this new play, Detroit, and they haven't heard of it. They'd rather go see Annie most times. But there is that section or segment of Providence that is very interested in new work and is very open-minded to new work. And the response that we've seen on this show and some of the new works that we've done in the past that have been very successful. Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson was a new musical we did last year. People love this kind of innovation in art.
All right, well, that's all the time we have, but everybody go see Detroit down at the Southside Cultural Center with the Wilbury Theater Group. You can get tickets online this weekend and next weekend. I want to thank Dr. Alan Rothman, who was our guest from the University of Rhode Island on the first half of the show. If you missed any of this episode or any other episode, you can catch up with those online at WPRI.com, and we'll see you next week back here on Executive Suite.